There's a version of childhood that looks fine from the outside. Good grades, polite manners, never causing problems, always knowing when to disappear into your room before things got tense. Adults called you wise. Teachers said you were mature. Relatives pointed at you like you were proof that the family was doing okay. But inside, there was a child running calculations no child should ever have to run. Is mom okay tonight? Is dad going to explode? If I stay quiet, will it pass? And the answer always was the same. Figure it out yourself. No one's coming. This video is about that child. Not to dramatize, not to assign blame, but because that child grew up and became you, and somewhere in the transition from surviving to living, something got lost, something that needs to be found. Let's start with a term that psychologists use that most people have never heard of: parentification. It happens when the emotional roles in a family get reversed, when a child becomes responsible, consciously or not, for the emotional stability of the adults around them. It doesn't always look dramatic, it doesn't require abuse in the traditional sense. Sometimes it's as quiet as a parent who cries and the child learns to comfort them. A household where tension is always simmering and one kid always plays peacekeeper. A family where one child just handles things because no one else does. And the child adapts. Of course they do. Children will reshape themselves entirely if it means preserving connection. That's not weakness, that's biology. Attachment is survival when you're small. But here's the cost. When a child is consistently wired to monitor, manage, and maintain the emotional temperature of the room, their nervous system doesn't develop around safety. It develops around threat detection. And a nervous system built on threat detection doesn't just switch off when the house gets quieter. It follows you into your friendships, into your relationships, into the way you work, the way you love, the way you rest, or more accurately, the way you can't. I want to talk about what that actually looks like in an adult body because it's subtle enough that most people never connect the dots. Do you find it nearly impossible to ask for help even when you're drowning? Do you feel most comfortable when you're needed, but vaguely uncomfortable when someone takes care of you? Do you apologize reflexively, not because you did something wrong, but because someone around you seems upset? Do you struggle to rest without guilt? Does stillness feel almost suspicious, like you must be forgetting something important? These aren't personality quirks. These are the fingerprints of a child who learned very early that their worth was tied to their usefulness. You didn't develop these patterns because something is wrong with you. You developed them because they worked. They kept the peace. They kept people close. They kept you safe. The problem is you're not 7 anymore, but your nervous system hasn't gotten the memo. There's a phrase that children who grew up this way tend to hear a lot. You're so mature for your age. It sounds like a compliment. It probably felt like one at the time, but what it actually described was a child who had learned to suppress their own needs so thoroughly that they no longer looked like a child at all. Maturity that comes from pain isn't the same as maturity that comes from growth. One is earned through experience, the other is extracted through necessity. And the tragedy is that the world rewards it. Teachers praise the responsible one. Partners gravitate toward the stable one. Friends lean on the one who always knows what to say. Meanwhile, no one asks, who holds you when you fall apart? And often the honest answer is no one, because you never let anyone see that you could. Here's where it gets psychologically complex. Many people who grew up this way develop what's called hyperindependence, a deep, almost compulsive resistance to relying on others. On the surface, it looks like strength, and in many ways it is. You're capable, you're reliable, you figure things out. But underneath, hyperindependence is often a trauma response. It's the adult version of a child who learned that needing people was dangerous because the people who were supposed to be there weren't. So you stop needing, or more precisely, you stop showing that you needed. And now, years later, you find yourself in relationships where you give constantly but receive awkwardly. Where someone's care for you makes you uncomfortable rather than comforted. Where love feels like a debt you haven't earned rather than something you simply deserve. That's not a relationship problem. That's an old wound still open, dressed in adult clothes. I also want to name something that doesn't get talked about enough: the grief of a childhood you didn't get to have. Because there's a particular kind of loss that has no funeral, no moment where the world pauses and says, that shouldn't have happened to you. You didn't get to mourn it at the time because you were too busy managing everything else, and so it stayed quietly in the background. It shows up as a strange sadness when you watch kids just play, free, careless, unbothered. A tightness in your chest at the idea of someone taking care of you. A fantasy, maybe half buried, that one day someone will finally notice how tired you really are. That grief is real. It deserves to be felt, not performed, felt, because what was frozen inside that child is still waiting for permission to thaw. So, what does healing actually look like? Not the Instagram version, the real version. It starts with the radical act of honesty, admitting that fine isn't the same as healed, that high functioning and whole are not synonyms, that the coping strategies that carried you to adulthood may be the exact same ones quietly limiting your life now. That's not failure, that's information. The next step, and this one is harder, is learning to receive. To let someone help you without immediately calculating how you'll repay it. To sit with someone's care without deflecting it. To say I don't know without feeling like you failed an exam. For someone who spent their childhood being the answer to everyone else's questions, this is genuinely difficult. It can feel foreign, even wrong, like you're breaking some unspoken rule. But here's what that discomfort is actually telling you. You're at the edge of your old pattern, and the only way through is to keep going. There's a question worth sitting with, not analyzing, just sitting with, what did I need as a child that I was never given? Maybe it was permission to be messy, uncertain, afraid. Maybe it was an adult who said, I'll handle it, you go play. Maybe it was someone who asked how you were doing and actually waited for the answer. Whatever it was, the healing begins when you start offering those things to yourself, not as a workaround, not as a substitute, but as a genuine renegotiation with the story you've been carrying. You are not responsible for what happened when you were small. You had no choice then. But you have choices now. If any of this landed, if you recognized yourself somewhere in these words, I want to say something clearly. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not fundamentally flawed because intimacy feels dangerous, or rest feels guilty, or love feels like something you have to earn. You are someone who developed extraordinary skills under circumstances that required them. And now, slowly, you get to ask a different question. Not how do I survive this, but what does it feel like to actually live? That's not a small question. It might be the most important one you've ever asked. The child who held everything together deserves to finally put it down. And you, the adult they became, are the only one who can tell them it's okay to do that.